All right, arrow functions. If you're writing any modern JavaScript, you're probably using them all the time. But what if I told you that their most important feature is also the one that's most misunderstood? Let's get into it. You see them everywhere, right? They definitely make your code look a lot cleaner, a lot more compact. So the natural question is, what's the deal? Are they really just syntactic sugar, a simple shorthand for a regular function? That's probably one of the biggest misconceptions in modern JavaScript. And look, while the shorter syntax is nice, their real power, the whole reason they were created in the first place, is to solve a classic, and let's be honest, often frustrating problem with the this keyword. So, to really appreciate why arrow functions are such a game changer, we kind of have to understand the problem they were designed to fix. Let's talk about what I call the classic this problem. Okay, so picture this, a scenario you've probably run into 100 times. You've got an object, and inside that object, there's a method that needs to loop over an array. Super common pattern, right? You just want to do something for each item, and that something needs to know about the object it's living in. All right, so here's our setup. We've got this group object. It's got a title, an array of students, and a method called showList. The goal here is simple. Loop through the students and print out their name along with the group's title. Seems easy enough, right? We'll just use a for each and pass it a good old regular function. But when you actually run this code, you don't get that nice list you were hoping for. Oh no. Instead, you get this classic and deeply frustrating error. The code just completely blows up because it can't read the title property of undefined. So what gives? Why does this happen? This keyword was working perfectly fine just a second ago inside its show list, so why does it suddenly just break the moment we're inside that for each callback? And this is the absolute key to understanding everything. Every normal function in JavaScript gets its own this value, and that value is determined by how the function is called. This value is its context. But here's the kicker. When for each calls our little function, it doesn't set a this context. So this becomes undefined, and poof, it completely loses the connection to our group object. For years, developers had all these little workarounds for this, like using .bind or saving this to a variable like that or self. It worked, but it was kind of clunky. But then arrow functions arrived and gave us a much more elegant solution. And honestly, the fix is so simple, it almost feels like cheating. On the left, there's our broken code. On the right, the working version. The only thing we changed was swapping the function keyword for that little arrow equals. And just like that, it works perfectly. So what is this magic? Well, this brings us to the absolute heart of what makes arrow functions so special. They don't have their own this. They just don't. They don't create a new context at all. Instead, they inherit it lexically, which is just a fancy way of saying it grabs this from where it's physically written in the code. So this inside the arrow function is the exact same this from its surrounding environment, the show list method. Problem solved. No more undefined. But wait, there's more. This whole design philosophy of not having its own stuff doesn't just stop with this. It actually extends to a couple of other key areas as well. So just like they don't have their own this, arrow functions also don't have their own arguments object. And again, this isn't a mistake. It's totally by design. It's actually really useful for certain patterns, especially for things like decorators, which are functions that wrap other functions to add new behavior. Let's look at this defer function. It takes another function and returns a new version or run after a delay. Now focus on that arrow function inside of setTimeout. Because it has no this or arguments of its own, when we call f.apply, it transparently passes along the this and arguments from the outer function call. It's a super clean pass-through that just works, no extra boilerplate needed. This same design principle leads us to one final but major consequence. You absolutely cannot use an arrow function as a class constructor with the new keyword. And really, when you stop and think about it, it makes perfect sense. The whole job of a constructor, when you call it with new, is to create a brand new object and assign it to this. Well, since an arrow function has no this of its own to assign anything to, the whole operation is impossible. It's a limitation that stems directly from its core strength. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. After all that, what's the simple rule we should walk away with? Let's distill all of this down to the essentials. Here it is in a nutshell. Arrow functions have no this, no arguments, and can't be called with new. They aren't a replacement for regular functions. They are a specific tool for a specific job. inheriting context from the environment they're defined in. If you only remember one thing from this explainer, let it be this. Don't just reach for an arrow function because it's shorter. Choose it when you intentionally want to avoid creating a new context, especially inside callbacks like for each, map, or set timeout. And that brings us full circle. Take a look at your own projects. Now that you know they're really about context, are there places where you've reached for an arrow function just to save a few keystrokes without thinking about it? Understanding this fundamental difference doesn't just prevent bugs, it makes you a more intentional and effective developer.